Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call to order our meeting for the full Board of Estimate Taxation Committee for September 24th. I'd like to start with rising and saluting the flag of our country. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. While still standing, I would call on Ms. Tarkington for a reading on one of our past members of the BET, Mr. Bob Gilhooly.
Yes, former member Bob Gilhooly passed away on August 26th at his home in Costco. Bob has lived in Greenwich since 1960 and has practiced law with Cummings and Lockwood until last year. During this time, he was involved in town affairs in Greenwich, including as a member of the Representative Town Meeting, a member of the Board of Health, head of Old Greenwich School Building Committee. His volunteer work for the town centered on the Board of Estimate and Taxation. He served for 18 years and is chairman of its Finance Committee. Please join us in a moment of silence.
Thank you very, very much. Mr. Gilhooly, as I used to call him in my younger days, worked for Cummings and Lockwood, and he had the benefit of his office being right there. So he serving as a BET member long before the internet, long before iPads, he just walked across the street. And I often wondered, 18 years. Wow. Joe. Not going to happen. Okay, with that, I would entertain a motion that we open up a public hearing for the Community Block Development Grant for 2014. Moved and seconded. Those in favor? Aye. Opposed? And that is on our CDBG. And what I will do on that is I'll leave that public hearing open for any resident member of the board who would like to speak on any of the items. Obviously, we have 3 items on our agenda. And I'll leave that open until we get through our regular scheduled items for the evening. Maybe I'll close it before Law Department gets here for the executive session, but we'll go accordingly. That would bring us to our routine applications. And I will call on our clerk to move those items for us.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move ED1, Board of Education, $87,000, approval to use a grant for the STEM curriculum.
Second. Okay, discussion. 1 point, if I may. Roland, on that 87, on that application, the money is for salary, but there's nothing in for fixed charges for the Medicaid or
Medicare, the Medicaid. I sent an email to the Board of Education asking them what this person would be who's going to be using this money, because they said it's temporary. The teacher can be doing this work, so the temporary, is full FICA, it's 5%. So teachers just be 1.45%, so that's what your information.
Okay, so while everybody's coming in the room, Peter, maybe can you grab the microphone off of the bench if we need it? So I'll call that just a quick accounting change where we're taking part of the grant.
As soon as I find out which one it is, just make that break and decide what that number for FICA should be.
Okay, I'm in favor of supporting the item. If you would, maybe send the board after you get it cleared up what the 87, the part that goes in fixed charges. Okay, all those in favor of that item? Aye. Opposed? Abstaining? Okay, continuing on.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move HD1 from the Health Department, $4,000, approval to use MRC funds, which is a grant.
Second. Moved and seconded. Discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed?
I'd like to move HD2, Health Department, $10,385, approval to use HER funds, which is also a grant.
Second. Again, it's been moved and seconded. Discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
effectively done is you've taken $1.7 million and added it back.
No.
Mr. Chairman, this item was approved at the Budget Committee. The vote was 4-0. This is a request to accept and use the 2014 CDBG entitlement funds, which are estimated to be about $680,000 for the CDBG program year 2014, which runs from January 1st through December 31st, 2014.
Okay, discussion on the item? For those of you who know, this is actually a request comes from the Office of the First Selectman. And when I served on this number was 1.2 million and it's down to 680,000. And it goes to obviously some very valuable programs and some very valuable capital projects. It's amazing to see it down there. Further discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstaining? 12-0. That will now go to the RTM. Right, and I'm sorry, we do have a public hearing running right now on the CDBG, so if there's any member of the audience, we'll be running the public hearing for a while, but if you have something you'd like to comment on or influence, we're in the middle of our items on that right now, so if you have anything, please feel free to raise your hand, and we'll be more than happy to recognize you.
So this is the time when we speak about the YMCA program?
Yeah,
Sure.
certainly, absolutely.
Okay.
Please, join us at the podium.
Okay.
I'm here tonight instead of Suzanne Adam, who usually comes, or Adrian Singer. Louisa Winthrop, and I'm an adult counselor at the Domestic Abuse Program at the YWCA. I just want to thank you all so much for your support that enables us to provide counseling, court advocacy, emergency shelter beds for victims of domestic abuse, counseling, all kinds of services that we're able to provide with your help. We treated nearly around 5,000 people this past year, 900 of whom were children. 123 used our emergency shelter program. 77 of those were children. And our hotline, 24-hour hotline, helped more than about 6,000 people. So we're just really grateful for all the help that the CDBG grant has given us in the past, and hopeful that that will continue, so we can keep providing, services to the people in the town and make it as safe a town as possible.
Thank you very, very much.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else at this time? I'm going to... Yes, Princess, I'm sorry.
Oh, it's okay. I know I'm not too visible. I have 4 email messages from one from Inspirica, another from Community Health Center, Friends of Laurel House, and Jewish Family Services, who are not going to be able to attend tonight's public hearing, but they wanted to submit their comments in writing or input in writing. So I'll
Thank
just
you.
pass it on to Roland.
If you would pass it on a roll, we can actually get those included in our minutes if you'd
Okay.
like.
Thank you.
No, thank you very, very much. Okay, anyone else? Next item is CD2, and I will call on Mr. Pellegrino again.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move CD2. This is, again, from Community Development. This is a request to transfer $131,681 from program year 2013 contingency funds to 2 items to be discussed in a moment.
Item has been moved. Seconded by Mr. Finger.
Again, Mr. Chairman, the Budget Committee approved this 4-0. The contingency funds are essentially the excess funds that the Community Development Program had for the program year 2013, and in a subsequent meeting, it was determined that those funds should be moved to the Housing Authority, Town of Greenwich. That's $121,681, and to the Shelter for the Homeless, $10,000.
Okay, discussion on the item? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? 12-0-0. Mr. Pellegrino, CD3.
CD3 is again from the Community Development. This is a request to have a loan forgiveness of $396,093.67. I will wish to move that item now.
Do I have a second? Do I have a second?
I have a reluctant second.
We have a second. Okay. If I may, I obviously we have a big attendance on this. Before your committee report, if I may, I haven't seen an item in town in a long time that generated this kind of an issue. Came out during the CDBG program during the summer, which is met with members of the RTM, the BET. We're fortunate we have two members, Mary Lee and Mark Johnson, that serve on that. And I knew this item was getting interesting when I got an email from the controller that I'm getting a lot of questions. The item went to the Budget Committee. It left the Budget Committee with questions, lots of dialogue. As you know, we moved our meeting schedule this for some travel arrangements, but this item has generated pages and pages of questions, and I'm gonna take the leisure of speaking for myself. 14 years ago, I wasn't on the BET. Mr. Krummick was. And welcome, nice to see you. And I would say that from my perspective, it's been an incredible learning experience. I've learned that the BET has some annual responsibilities on the parsonage cottage. I've learned that I've watched the email trails, and I've seen everybody on the BET dig in, and the questions have continued. During the Budget Committee meeting, we were in this room, and I was sitting next to Mark Johnson, and I'm like, something is just, I'm missing something. So what I'd like to do is, this request obviously comes through the Office of the First Selectman, and I believe we have a fairly good checklist of the items that we've asked for, what we've gotten, what we might not have gotten. I was going to ask, and I'll ask Mr. Tessie, but I was actually going to ask Princess for sort of an overview of this. I haven't heard this. I didn't go to CDBG, and I heard you answer some questions. And when I was on CDBG, you know, obviously you led that. And from the point of you've seen all the email traffic, you've seen the communication. The BET had such a big folder going out. We had to split it. There was a 230-page document. By the way, thank you, Housing Authority. So if I could, before we get to our committee reports, I'd ask Princess if you could give us sort of this high altitude of what this is, what this is about. Sorry to put you on the spot.
So you just want a background?
Yes, how did this come along? What started it? Where does this?
Okay.
This has nothing to do with our annual grant from the state. They
Correct.
pick programming, and this is sort of a unique item. I don't recall an item like this before.
No, well, it's somewhat related to it because we do receive program income from the repayment. So that $38,718, if you remember, that we get annually. Okay, well, good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to present this item or to present some of the facts regarding this item. For the record, my name is Princess Urfe, and I'm the Community Development Administrator in Greenwich. As most of you already know, like Mr. Mason said, there has been a lot of discussion, inquiries, and requests for information related to this item. For a quick background, this item was initiated when Mr. George Yankovic, Chairman of the Housing Authority Board of Commissioners, sent a letter to Mr. Tessie back in February of this year requesting for the 1995 CDBG loan to be forgiven. So that's what started this whole item requests. After meeting with representatives from the Housing Authority, town staff, and CDAC leadership, the first selectman asked for the advisory committee to review the Housing Authority's request. The first selectman also asked for the advisory committee to issue a recommendation on whether the CDBG loan should be forgiven or if the town should continue to collect payment. Following the first selectman's directive, the advisory committee provided an opportunity for the Housing Authority to present the request during the May 23rd CDAC meeting. The group then held another meeting on July 11th for a comprehensive review and evaluation and to further discuss the item. With several issues still outstanding, a subcommittee was assigned to gather additional documents prior to the group's August 1st meeting, during which they voted to recommend to the first selectman approval of the CDBG loan forgiveness request. The vote was 11-2. The advisory committee took on a massive task as they reviewed over 400 pages of documents and balanced the pros and cons of the CDBG loan forgiveness request. Ultimately, the advisory committee decided to recommend for the town to forgive the CDBG loan as requested by the Housing Authority. Now, the advisory committee recommended supporting the request due to the following reasons. They had three major reasons. Number one, the funds were originally a grant that was converted into a loan to comply with tax credit regulations at the time. Number two, Parsonage Cottage serves the public good, providing valuable services to low-income seniors. And number three, forgiving the loan will have no direct impact on Greenwich taxpayers. The first selectman concurred with the advisory committee's recommendation and charged the CDBG office to submit the item to the BET. As a side, this request and the attachment that's included with CD3 were also submitted to the Board of Selectmen, and during their September 12 meeting, they voted 3-0 to approve the request. I wanted to share the background related to this request with your board to emphasize the complexity of this item. Most of the materials that accompany this request are documents dating back to the mid-1990s, and it showed the various participants involved in the successful rehabilitation of Parsonage Cottage, a wonderfully run facility that provides excellent service which not only meets but also greatly exceeds the housing and supportive needs of the frail elderly. Given the significant value of this facility, the town has been consistent in providing financial support through the CDBG program. Parsonage Cottage is a remarkable facility, and it is one of the many gems that make Greenwich a unique and exceptional town. Now, moving forward to present time, the item is now before your board. I have been asked to do further review and evaluation. I have been asked by a couple of members to provide the input of the CDBG office, which I can provide later if you want. I just wanted to give you the background.
So, I'm sorry? Yes. Peter?
Good evening, members of the BET, Mr. Mason, and guests. I think you've heard a very thorough description of the process that this item has gone through to reach you. Clearly, the underlying issue for the town is, in my view, is whether or not we want to continue to enhance the overall opportunities for the frail aged in our community in the support of this facility by allowing the Housing Authority, which administers and overruns the facility, to better reposition themselves financially due to the changing financial markets. Underlying this, I think that's what they're setting out to do. I think it is certainly very complicated. I have no doubt that your questions are concerning to you given the unique nature of this request. But clearly, when this was successfully undertaken, it was heralded by many as being extremely thoughtful and creative way to preserve and maintain this licensed home for the aged. Otherwise, it would have been closed. So those leaders at the time, and Mr. Crumick is here tonight, certainly can attest better than I can the amount of time and effort they went through to avail themselves to various funding mechanisms to see to it that this facility was not only repaired but rehabilitated and established and licensed in a manner that has set a standard throughout our state. And that's what they did. Clearly, it has been, I think, very carefully documented through the materials that were submitted through the Community Development Block Grant Office. I think it received considerable scrutiny by our fellow citizens who serve on the Community Development Advisory Committee, which is not only representative of members of the RTM, BET, P&Z, but community organizations that represent special populations within the community. So CDAC, through its chair, Alma Rutgers, I think, gave it the matter its due diligence. Personally speaking, at the end of the day, I think it supports, again, the opportunity for the Housing Authority to refinance their debt, to position Parsonage Cottage even stronger for the future, to maintain itself, to improve and to care for the residents that are presently living there and beyond, and also paves the way for them to restructure a town loan and pay it back to us, which from a policy point of view, this board and other town governing boards, the RTM, the selectmen, can determine how best to put to use for the interests of our broader citizenry. So yes, it's a complex issue, but underlying the issue is, who are the direct beneficiaries? I think the direct beneficiaries are citizens who need the support most, and that is our frail elderly. Those who've visited the site, Mr. Pellegrino, I think you spoke very eloquently about this. You live in close proximity to it, have attested to its outstanding management and the quality of life it provides for these residents. So I know you've got the hard decision to make, a judgment to make, but while it's perhaps a little tedious given the unique structure that was utilized back in the mid to late 90s, I think you have to have faith in all of the people. It's not just one person, but all the people who successfully achieved this and now move forward and allow the Housing Authority to harness their resources and ability to do further good for the community. And that's how I truly see it. So we have several people. Alma Rutgers, you've heard from her at the Budget Committee. I want to thank the Budget Committee. You voted for this unanimously, 4-0-0. It certainly is going to get further scrutiny when it goes to the RTM. And I recognize that you're looking to position this perhaps in a better, stronger case for that body. But again, I think it doesn't have to be as complicated as it is. I think it's been laid out fairly straightforward, at least for the Board of Selectmen and for 4 members of the Budget Committee who moved it to all of you. So I hope you would give it due consideration this evening and support it. If you should decide not to, for whatever reasons you articulate publicly, I would then encourage you not to delay this until your next meeting, but actually hold a special meeting so that it could get on the RTM call for October. And the reason for that is, I think, bureaucratic delay of our processes potentially could result in loss of opportunity in financing for the Housing Authority. At least that's what they have expressed to me, and I think we all can appreciate not doing that. We talk about efficiencies. Let's show some efficiency and work to try to meet the needs of a very trusted and valued community partner, the Housing Authority of Greenwich. Thank you.
Thank you. We have 2 members that have obviously put an enormous amount of work in this, but as Mr. Tessie said, the Budget Committee, I'm going to actually,
report?
I'll go for the Budget Committee report next.
Sure.
And having more meetings before the end of the year and for Mr. Pellegrino is something I'm sure the rest of this board would love to see him have.
What our money's worth out of it. It's mostly high-priced talent.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I'm trying to make my reports very succinct tonight. The Budget Committee did take this up. We had participants from CDAC, from the Housing Authority, from the Community Development, and the liaisons. Everyone had an opportunity to speak. It was a fairly lengthy meeting. I believe there was a number of questions asked by all four members of the Budget Committee. Before voting on it, one member, Mr. Finger, raised his concern that there be an amendment made to the proposal before us, and that was essentially focused on if the loan was forgiven, that is the topic under discussion, that the Housing Authority would make its best efforts then to go out, do the refinancing that they plan to do, and pay off the town loan. I believe that's the essence of what was proposed. We took that up first, and we voted 4-0. Everyone was unanimous in terms of the effort that Bill put in to think this topic through. We then voted, as Mr. Tessie said, 4-0 to accept this. Now, I want to amend my thoughts on one very important issue here. Before taking this topic up, members of the committee were certainly aware of emails and questions that had been raised by our liaisons, and in particular, I think the work that Mary Lee Kernan's done, as well as Mark Johnson. And we tried to address as many of those questions as possible. I know I personally had a question or two that was to be addressed subsequent to the Budget Committee meeting. Subsequent to the Budget Committee meeting, I know that there's been another round of emails, this time with Mr. Finger, Ms. Tarkington, Ms. Kernan, and that a number of other questions were raised. I think where the issue stands subsequent to the Budget Committee meeting is the T's being crossed and the I's being dotted, and to that issue, I will end my summary of what we did at the Budget Committee.
Okay, CDBG members. Mr. Johnson. Or it doesn't matter, whoever wants to go first.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, as you referenced before, Mary Lee Kiernan and I are representatives to the Community Development Advisory Committee. Just from my personal perspective, I support this action. You know, as mentioned, it's a $396,000 loan that was turned into, it was a grant turned into a loan. You know, I'm in support of forgiving this loan. It is going to substantially help them clean up the balance sheets for Parsonage Cottage, for the Housing Authority. It does serve a very good public need for accommodations for those who otherwise can't provide for themselves. I did have some questions, mainly, you know, as Princess referred to, there's $38,000 in interest and principal paid back each year. And of that, $30,000 does go back into the use of grants for our other activities. It supplements the amount from the federal government. And $8,000 roughly goes towards administrative costs. And one of the things I wanted to see was to make sure the advisory committee understood that, and as it turned out, they voted 11-2, recognizing that they were going to lose that annual support for their different grants and administrative aid. It was also interesting that I wanted to see exactly what the interest from banks might have been. We asked the Housing Authority to go back and perhaps get us a letter of interest from one of the local banks to show that they would indeed be looking to refinance for the Housing Authority. They did get a letter of interest from Greenwich Bank and Trust. Granted, it's only a letter of interest, but at least showed you know, some interest on their behalf. I also see that there's a little bit of faith that we have to have in the Housing Authority running this property, and they do seemingly a good job with all the other facilities in town. It's a big job. Certainly a lot of people do a lot of hard work trying to maintain the properties. It also, there's a couple questions on long-term viability of this whole program, given the federal government keeps cutting back. Where are we going to be 3, 4, 5 years from now? Nobody really knows, but that certainly was a consideration in losing the $38,000 a year. In general, I'm supportive. I know my colleagues have a lot of different questions, as mentioned by Mr. Mason. They certainly do have to be answered to all of our satisfaction. But in general, I'm supportive of this.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just want to thank members of the Housing Authority and everyone here for coming tonight, but in particular point out Princess Urfe and her hard work on the 3 CD applications before us tonight. I hope everyone remembers Princess is highly respected with all of the many nonprofits in our community. She's really the chief liaison to the nonprofit sector on behalf of the town, so I want to thank her for that. I just want to begin my remarks by sharing what my objectives have been throughout this process, and I believe, or I hope that these are also the objectives of my colleagues on the BET. And the first objective is to maintain high-quality, supportive, and affordable housing, broadly speaking, facilities here in Greenwich. I have a long association as a leader of the 2 biggest grant makers in this community, the United Way and the Fairfield County Community Foundation, who are tireless champions of affordable and supportive housing. So, and I know extensive time was put in on developing recommendations for affordable housing also in the town's POCD, and I thank the Housing Authority for participating in that effort. And I am extremely grateful to the Housing Authority for being a very important key provider in this area for many years, and they tonight have earned that again by receiving $151,000 through CD1 and $121,000 through CD2 already this evening. Another objective I have, particularly as a member of the CDAC committee, is to have a very balanced view of any proposal before the CDAC committee. CDAC faces what every grant maker, like the United Way, and what this BET constantly faces, which is competing interests, competing requests for finite resources. And in the case of CDBG, the resources are dwindling dramatically. We've heard about this a little bit already tonight. We now receive almost half of what came to this town in 2001 from HUD. And the needs of our nonprofits, if I can speak to that for a minute, are worse than ever. It's a perfect storm for local nonprofits. State and federal dollars are down, fundraising is down, endowments are down, and demand for services is up sharply. And so we must be mindful that every request, whether it's for a grant or for a loan forgiveness, impacts the dozens of other nonprofits who are seeking CDBG funding. Specifically, if this loan is forgiven, and Princess has done the math, over $500,000 will not come back to the CDBG fund for disbursements and coverage of administration, as Mark pointed out. And there's a very good chance that we will run out of CDBG funds from the federal government in the next few years. So it is most appropriate to balance the loan forgiveness requested in CD3 against the social good we forego to all other areas of need in this community by not dispersing these substantial funds throughout to other nonprofits. This is not an easy analysis. Grant makers face this all the time, but this is the policy question that was before CDAC and is still before the BET this evening. Another objective I have is to do a very thorough job as a BET member, and that for me has several components. That means asking not only the policy question I just set forth, but also asking financial questions about this limited partnership entity and these contemplated transactions from the town's perspective and from the perspective of a town property. Remember, CD3 involves a property that's been leased for 99 years from the town, and it's our job to make sure that the town and the town property are well served in all of these transactions. And as a BET member, it's also my job to do risk management. In this case, that means making sure that we're meeting the federal CDB objectives, following all HUD regulations, so that we protect against the risk of a federal audit of our CDBG practices and documentation and potential loss of CDBG funding. We have to, as Joe said, cross every T and dot every I. Risk management also means making sure the equity in this town property stays in the town property and making sure the town is protected in respect of future renovations, future financing, future insurance risks, and future plans for Parsonage Cottage. So let's just turn briefly to the documentation and information provided to BET members. I think you had over 31 or 32. We got another one yesterday, totaling over 250 pages. You have a spreadsheet of questions, Princess reference. I'm not saying we're going to go through all of them right now, but I do want to point out an email that was sent Friday. And that email summarized a conversation with our area HUD representative that Princess and I participated in. And that call took place in her office, and all BET members were invited. Our HUD representative stated that in syndicated financings like this that involve tax loss credit partners and CDBG loans, when the tax credits are used up, and we know that's happened here, the tax loss credit partners normally seek to exit the partnership. There's nothing unusual about this at all. But there are two courses of action here. Either the limited partnership seeks to restructure the CDBG loan, or two, seeks forgiveness of the CDBG loan. And from what I can observe in the progression of this application through various town bodies to date, restructuring or modifying the CDBG loan has not really been on the table. Our HUD representative suggested that if we go down the path of loan restructuring, we should make sure that principal and interest payments are contingent, or we can put this on the table, contingent on cash flow from the operations. So if there is none, there is no loan repayments to CDBG. And I understand there's some willingness on the part of the Housing Authority to discuss this, which is great. This option has the potential to address everyone's needs. We preserve repayment of these CDBG funds that can go out in the community, and we help this partnership entity as it seeks to restructure its balance sheet. We also learned on this call that if we go down the second path of forgiving the CDBG loan, it is typical to have a loan forgiveness agreement. And again, the discussion of such a document with provisions that protect the federal CDBG mandate and protect the town has not really been on the table and not drafted yet. And I believe that such a document should accompany this application. The loan forgiveness agreement should address a number of bullets that Princess set forth in her email on Friday. And I'll highlight a few of them quickly. Language to require affordability of Parsonage Cottage be maintained for the remaining term of the lease. Now, CDBG guidelines say affordability is 51% of the residents must be low to moderate income. In order to address compliance with HUD, this covenant should run for what would have been the term of the CDBG loan, but I think we would all agree as a community we want affordability to continue for the term of the lease, which goes longer. Language also requiring Parsonage Cottage Senior Resident Limited Partnership, this is the partnership we're talking about, submit audited financial statements and tax returns to the town on an annual basis, as well as its general partner, the Town Hall Annex Corporation. Language to require that any cash flow out of the partnership be applied to capital improvements to Parsonage Cottage. Language to require that any net proceeds from any refinancing of the town loan be used for capital improvements at Parsonage. Language to require that all future loans may be taken on by this partnership be dedicated to capital improvements for Parsonage. So as the law department reviews these issues in the old documents, they may have other issues they want to include, and they will, I'm sure, be speaking with us at some point, particularly to the law committee, I hope. I want to raise several other quickly concerns that fall outside of the loan forgiveness agreement. And this is probably addressed to everyone in the town, particularly the law department, who may have a role in reviewing the financial aspects of this as well as the risk and insurance aspects of this. And the first area of concern is, are we certain that the payment of the limited partners is allowed by the two promissory notes, the operating agreement and the lease? And if not, what documentation do we need to address this? There is language in the CDBG promissory note and the town note suggesting that a corporate reorganization of the partnership triggers a default. So I would like to hear at some point discuss with the law department this issue. And another question is, has anyone received yet the final audit of the limited partnership interests? I think this is still in process, and we will hopefully receive that soon. The second area is, has the law department looked, or anyone on the town side looked at the certificate of need here? And will this require any modification in light of the refinancing and the sale of the limited partnership interests? Third, has anyone on the town side reviewed the license as a home for the aged and our qualification for state subsidies and what impact these transactions may have on our reimbursements? Fourth, is the law department satisfied the town is protected in respect of new capital improvements contemplated by these transactions? When I look at the original loan agreement and the operating agreement, there's insurance and indemnification in respect of the 1995 renovations only. The lease gives some indemnification going forward prospectively, but it has stated levels of insurance, which I think will require review as to whether really that's adequate in 2013 and going forward. Number 5, is the law department in the town satisfied that the equity in this town-owned and leased property and in this limited partnership is preserved for the benefit of the town and Parsonage Cottage somewhere in the documents that we've been given today? I don't think that's been addressed yet, and we need that in a loan forgiveness agreement or somewhere else. And finally, what's the maximum amount a commercial bank would lend here, potentially above the amount of the town load? This is still something that I think is being discussed. I think the town has an interest in seeing the documentation for this commercial loan because the cash flows from a public property are securing this loan. Okay? And I think we're in uncharted territory here. I asked this question of Pete, I think yesterday, is there any town property where a commercial bank is taking a senior secured interest in the cash flows from the operation on that public property? Do we have a policy on this? Still, yeah, I'm still hoping to get answers on all of this, and I think this is all worthy, very serious topics that are worthy of deliberation. So those are just a few questions. I understand my colleagues have more questions. I will say here, just for good perspective, healthy perspective on all this, back in the years leading up to 1995, there was a lot of time spent by lawyers, auditors, and others representing all sides in order to put together this important syndicated financing for a worthy cause. But now we're unwinding a very complex relationship, and we have to put in the effort to make sure that the next phase of this relationship is 100% understood, that 100% of town interests and risks are addressed, and that the town property is 100% well served by these transactions and going forward. So I think it's clear that the BET, working with the law department, CDBG, our controller, still have a lot of thought to put in, particularly on the 2 courses of action that I mentioned, modification or a loan forgiveness agreement, if you get past the policy question that I mentioned at the outset. So really this comes down to a very simple question: are we ready tonight? In my opinion, it's premature to hold a vote because CD3 doesn't have complete information and documentation that we as BET members need to make an informed decision on behalf of our taxpayers and to send an appropriate package to the RTM to consider. It's a very important facility. We all know this, and I expect we can all work together and come to a resolution on that. So with that, if anyone has a case to the contrary, that we are 100% ready, I would be grateful to hear about that. Thank you.
Thank you. And to add to the questions, and I'm sure we have a few more speakers, I too was fortunate enough to meet with Mr. Johnson, Mr. Minarski, and we were talking over the changes since this was instituted. And it's a specialty property, and we were talking about the financing of it. And with the modern banking laws that have changed post-economic meltdown, it's a specialty property, can't be used for anything. So we know that all financing is going to be on 10-year notes due to the law with 20-year amortization schedules. So that's another challenge that we were agreeing on there, and some of the challenges that we have there. I don't know how you put all those emails together. I have to just say that first. I don't know how you did that, because there was a series of emails, some of which I didn't even know about. Further comment, Ms. Tarkington, did you have something on this?
Well, again, I certainly appreciate everyone being here, and I think everyone's worked together on this very well. And I want to thank Mark Johnson and Mary Lee Cannon in terms of all the work they've done. I certainly supported in the Budget Committee, the forgiveness of the loan. However, I was only given the package, although I had requested it in advance at the meeting with the documents, which obviously was much too large to read during the meeting. And, I did have questions. I asked a question about the equity, and the answers have actually changed in some of the information that's been sent to us since. I thought that Ms. Kiernan provided an excellent summary, but one thing that I would just like to modify in her statement, if possible, it does talk about the letter from the bank, a first leasehold mortgage on the property. And again, we've sort of been given partial documents. This property is actually part of a much larger parcel. It's never been split. It's part of the Witherall parcel. And so, I don't know, we didn't get a copy again of the title policy that's listed in some of these documents. But this is not based on cash flows. This is actually based on a first leasehold mortgage on the property itself. And that, I think, the BET needs to understand and discuss. I certainly wasn't aware of that when I voted for this transaction. But I do think proceeding with the loan forgiveness or some derivative of that seems to make sense.
So why I see representatives from our law department, town attorney. First of all, I'm going to thank you for responding to all those emails. Advice. I sincerely do feel that there are things that have been requested and there are open items. I'd like to see this item move forward in a positive note, but on the other hand, can you value the list and the items in the forgiveness note and the items that we're raising question on some sort of town council advice here? Let me rephrase it. Do we have a potential timeline where we can get through these issues and have these loan forgiveness documents and have these decisions made?
Can you use the microphone, please?
Thank you.
Good evening. From what I heard from Ms. Mary Leigh Kiernan and the others here, there seem to be several questions, and certainly over the period of the last week, I think we've all seen our inboxes filled with Parsonage Cottage questions. I think, from what I understand, some of the questions are directed to our office, and we'll certainly look into them in an expeditious manner. Ms. Kiernan, you raised some good points, and I wrote down at least maybe 5 questions that were directed to us. Seems like there are other questions that may be more appropriately directed to perhaps risk management. We can try to coordinate that in terms of are the levels of insurance appropriate, that kind of thing. I think it's certainly a good idea to revisit insurance. And some questions perhaps to be addressed by the Controller's Office. So in terms of coordination, if you're asking for a time frame, we'll certainly work with whatever your board wants to do. If you decide to take a vote this evening, if you move this forward, we can certainly get started on at least drafting either a loan forgiveness document or a loan modification document, whatever you decide. We will get started on that, but at the same time, try to address the questions you raised in terms of reviewing the lease and the other documents. So we'll take direction from you in terms of what your time frame is and how you wish to handle this item this evening.
Okay, Mr. Pellegrino?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to share a few comments, and I'll be quick. I want to be very clear. I support Parsonage Cottage, unequivocally. I support efficiency and cost effectiveness in terms of capital needs, the operating costs to maintain the quality of the service that we have at Parsonage Cottage. If I step back and I look at this proposed transaction from a distance, I think it makes good sense. I think it makes good business sense to do what the Housing Authority is proposing. I have to also say that there's enough points that have been raised that we have an obligation as a board to make sure the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted. I happen to think that there's importance in doing this before it goes to the RTM, because if you go to the RTM without these questions absolutely being buttoned down, it's going to lead to confusion at best and a poor result at worst. There's a specific letter that was just handed out from Mr. Yankovic that addressed the question that I raised at the Budget Committee. And I'm not going to go into this right now in detail, but I want to say that now that I have this new information, I would be hesitant to offer $170,000 to the tax partners to take them out of their position. Because I would look at this information and say, I'll give you $1, not $170,000. So you've got a lot of issues here, and this is why I think you do need to clean this stuff up. If it's appropriate, Mr. Chairman, I would make a motion that this item be postponed, that there be a working group that works on it over the next week or 2 weeks or whatever needs to be done, so that all these issues are tied together so that we can get this accomplished, because I do believe that there's a consensus here on this board to want to do this, but do it absolutely properly.
Okay, so
At the appropriate time, I'd make that motion.
Mr. Norton?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to modify the motion.
Well, that motion's not seconded, so if you would like to second that motion and propose an amendment.
Yes, I would like to second that and propose an amendment that we move to postpone consideration of this item until no later than the regularly scheduled, the rescheduled date of the October BET meeting.
I have a motion. Is there a second?
I second.
Let me make a point of order.
Sure.
You have representatives from the Housing Authority here, and I think if they so desire, they should at least be given an opportunity
Absolutely.
to address some of the issues that have surfaced so that it continues the dialogue in a public session, not necessarily an email, which makes it very hard for the general public to know what really is transpiring. So perhaps.
Is there anyone who'd like to?
George Yankovic is the chair of the Board of Commissioners, as well as Anthony Johnson, who's the executive director. We also have Mr. Crumick, who is here, who has the historical knowledge of what took place in the structure.
So before we go, I do have a motion to postpone this item to a future date, and I'm going to ask a little leeway from my board to not act on that in the fact that everybody is here. And I would like to continue the discussion on this, but I would say it's a fairly lengthy list, so if we could try to focus on maybe picking off the issues, and so we can kind of do our checklist on these items.
Yeah, excuse me. I may lose my voice during the discussion, but both sides, Princess's office and the Housing Authority, I think, have done a monumental effort trying to address the questions. It seems as though they became exponential as they continue to come in. Unfortunately, I haven't gotten the list of questions raised tonight. My memory from reading the loan documents, the lease documents, and many of the other documents, some of the answers are in there now, and it would take me a while to research and point out where they are. But I thank you for the efforts and the discussion that you brought forward. Our big concern is the commitment that I had made to refinancing the town loan. As I tried to point out, and I'm sure you all realize, as interest rates go up, borrowing power goes down on the part of the Housing Authority. There may be a point at which we won't be able to borrow the close to $800,000 if the postponement or the delay continues. A 1 month delay in appearing before your board, I estimate, will not get us back before the RTM till sometime in February or March. So the financial markets will change. Hopefully, I think we have about a point to play with right now in our preliminary calculations. And again, depending on the terms that we negotiate, the type of loan, we may be able to do better. So I'm willing to try and chase down all the answers as quickly as possible. In the past, I've tried to return questions the same day I receive them. I had prepared an outline, a summary, and if you'd like us to read it into the record, I'd ask Tony to do it because I'll have trouble reading. If you prefer entering the written copy in, I accept that also. But I believe I sent all of you a copy of a quick summary today. At that, we'll answer any additional questions. I would like to reiterate Mr. Tessie's suggestion of a special meeting. I know you meet probably too often. in order that we might be able to get on the agenda for the October RTM meeting, which would be probably our last opportunity before this or late winter, later February or Marches. Thank you.
Roland, real quick, 1 second. Roland, what is that cutoff date for the RTM? October 4th.
Wow.
Well, you can get an item on the agenda. You just,
No, that's a detail.
right. And you have longer than that. Okay. Thank you. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Do you have anything else to say?
Yeah. Okay. Yes.
Yeah, I'm Anthony Johnson, Executive Director of the Greenwich Housing Authority. I'd like to thank you all as well for the tremendous amount of work and effort you have to put into reading all of this documentation that we've provided. I just wanted to clarify a couple of things, that we also operate the Town Hall Annex building that we run, which is a town lease facility. That facility has had a first mortgage on it in previous years. So it's not unprecedented that a facility through a leasehold obtains a mortgage. That's not a, and it was also an LP, the same setup as that was. In addition to that, I also had a conversation with the director of the Community Development Block Grant process at HUD, and I think I sent out an email, at least I forwarded it to Princess, as well as to Peter Minarski, to hopefully distribute to you all. In that email, HUD's only criteria at this point, because the dollars were given to the Housing Authority, which was a proper beneficiary of those dollars, was public good, which is what we've done. They have no other requirements for the decision that you make regarding this loan. Now, you can do what you like, obviously, in terms of modifying the loan or putting additional conditions onto it. But in basically, as far as the federal dollars that the town received, that became the dollars that modified or rehabbed Parsons College, those dollars have no requirements from the federal government any longer. So I think that should clarify that. Now, you have an obligation to do and protect the asset as best you can, and we understand that. I think that's all I have.
Well, let me ask you a question. Just because we have some very brilliant people in the room. It's today. Parsonage Cottage does not exist in its current form. How would we do this today? How would we do this differently today?
How you would do this differently today, which is what we've done previously. We have a facility that we built and sold to affordable families called Hollywood Lane. In that 4 units that we developed, we received community development block grant dollars.
Who received it?
The Housing Authority of the Town of Greenwich received
Directly.
those dollars directly.
Okay.
We then in turn loaned those dollars to the owners at no cost. We took on a second mortgage on those properties that the Housing Authority currently has on its books for those facilities. So when the owners sell, the Housing Authority gets those dollars back to return again to another family who would purchase that same unit.
So back in '94, we took CDBG money.
Yes.
We put it.
In '94, the
We
way...
gave it to the limited partnership, the third party, I'll call it.
Yes. Which...
They, with other money too, but I'm just taking the CDBG money because my concern is everything we do with CDBG, that we do it actually, so we don't get an audit or we don't forfeit any funds in the future.
Sure.
So I'm in unknown territory, Mr. Crumming, take it easy now. So we took that money from CDBG, we put it in a third party partnership, they then, okay, so let's try it again.
It's a little bit different than you think, Mike.
I'll go right ahead.
Come on.
Yeah.
And because it's televised, I think you need to go to the microphone.
No, this is important.
It's not televised?
It's being taped.
However, I'm going to pretend it's televised.
It's being
It's being taped? All right. My name is Ed Krummick, for those of you that don't know me. And I'm here actually to apologize to you.
you're jumping through hoops because of a transaction and a plan that I was one of the architects of when I was chairman of the Board of Social Services in 1994 and 1995. I also, as I came to Town Hall today, realized that I was on the Budget Committee of the BET in 1996 and thereafter when we approved the structure. Now, originally this structure, just so you know, and just give you a little background, as best I recall, originally the first CBGB grant, sorry, was that the Rock Club or the, I always had that problem.
That board, that group.
But anyway, CDBG grant was strangely enough for the Board of Social, for the Department of Social Services to pursue the Certificate of Need. The Certificate of Need basically was obtained by the Department of Social Services. And that was controversial at the time because we weren't a private agency. We were taking the lead, we the town of Greenwich, because that's who I was spearheading this for, took the lead to take a town facility and a town program, which was the last almshouse in this state, Parsonage Cottage, which was, frankly, a dump with dormitory accommodations. And our objective was to renovate it into a licensed state-of-the-art home for the aged. We realized a couple things. One, we were dealing with the legendary Sam Stoll BET, right? We're getting them to approve this concept. And we invited the Housing Authority to come on board because we knew that in the future, the town of Greenwich wasn't going to continue to operate this thing. And the Housing Authority, a public agency or quasi-public agency, we invited them to come on board. But we got, as I recall, what we needed to renovate the building. We got the appropriation from the town. We got block grant money. And by the way, once we got the block grant money, as far as I know, that was it in dealing with HUD. We got the money. The town of Greenwich actually got the money, and for the purpose of building this licensed home for the aged, for the frail elderly of the town. And then we got this other idea, and the other idea was the tax credits. And the tax credits came after the fact. We gave the money, in essence, or whoever the entity was that they formed was going to get the money, not the way we had received it as an appropriation or as a grant, which is something you all deal with every day and understand. We reprogrammed it as loans, and I'm going to make the little quotation mark because this was a unique situation because we had the ability to, at that time, or the entity had the ability to sell the tax credits, but it was all designed as a way of renovating this facility and providing for 40 frail elderly at a time, and the income streams we inadvertently created, or we created, I guess we intended to create them, but they were very incidental. The whole idea was how to get this home for the frail elderly up and operating. And it wasn't intended, and I can say this as a member of the BET when we voted on this, it wasn't intended to provide an income source for the block grant. That was an incidental benefit. It wasn't intended to provide another source of income for the general fund. That was incidental. I wouldn't say unintended, but it's incidental. And I just ask you, as you cut through this Gordian knot that we created 15 years ago, with a little bit of creative thinking, I would ask you to use that same creative thinking and try to figure out with the Housing Authority how to help this very worthy parsonage cottage to continue. And the fact that they were able to pay back $675,000 into the block grant is a $675,000 boon to the town. Because remember, we had the money. We didn't have to restructure it. We had the money, and we were able to reprogram it, and that's good. but the primary focus has always been how do you provide quality housing for the frail elderly? Now, again, it's town land, yes, but remember the town was operating it. And in order to make this work, and in order to have the special place we have now, we had to set up a different approach. So the Housing Authority, I keep pointing to them for the Housing Authority, the Housing Authority created that entity, and the town entered into a lease. But again, it was always intended, and the primary focus was housing for the frail elderly. And I think they've done a spectacular job, frankly. And I'm actually proud of what we did, although I will say, and I do apologize, I think we complicated your lives somewhat. But if you look at it from that perspective, in a perspective of 15 years ago, you'll see that everybody was on the same page. Board of Social Services, the Housing Authority, the BET, the RTM, we knew we were doing something unique at the time, all of us, and we were happy to do it because we got the wonderful facility we have today. And now you're left with the consequences, but I would suggest to you stay the course and keep your eye on providing for the frail elderly, and we'll all continue to do fine.
First of all, I'll get to thanking you for volunteering in a minute when I volunteer you for something, but first of all, I think everybody here is, from our actions on the Thinner Witherall alone, we're dedicated to helping the people in the town, and this will happen that way. I fully understand when I see this map, this handwritten map of how the partnership went, that we're unraveling something to try to get this. So, if there's no one else who is interested in speaking.
Oh, I'm going to give up the mic.
I thought you had a question. Oh, no, I'm going to be back with you. Princess, did you have something?
Mr. Chairman,
I got it.
If it's appropriate, I'd like to provide my comments now.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so I've been hearing a lot of Princess doing a good job and gathering all the documentation, and thank you, but that's all that I've actually been doing regarding this item. Beginning from the requests by the First Selectman, I've started researching all the documents we have, scanning them, and sending them to the advisory committee, copying the Housing Authority staff, just so they're all in the same page, on the same page. Now, I've been asked to provide what my perspective is in terms of the CDBG program alone. And it might be a selfish view on my part, but I believe that as you evaluate this item, I hope that you look into this three considerations. The financial level, I know you've heard this many times already, but granting the request means that the town will lose $38,718 in CDBG funds annually. The balance of that, as you know, under CD3 is $396, or the amount that's being asked to be forgiven is $396,093.67. In reality, the amount that we will be losing is about $542,052. That's $38,718 times 14 years, the remaining term of the loan. So, your board must make the determination whether this trade-off is fair and reasonable. Thus forgiving the CDBG loan, thereby losing $542,052 in CDBG funds, adhere to the town's financial policy standards. Is it something that you would do if it was a town loan? The second point I want to raise is on a local level, the impact of this $38,718. This will really be affecting the other nonprofit agencies that we have in town. We also provide funding to the Boys and Girls Club, the Child Guidance Center, Kids in Crisis. The list goes on and on. The YWCA, you've heard from a representative. So foregoing the CDBG loan repayments will have a direct impact on the clients who benefit from the programs and services offered by these agencies. $38,000 is a lot of money to these agencies. The third point I want to raise is on a national level. The town needs to be consistent with the message expressed to HUD, both to the Hartford, Connecticut, and Washington, D.C. offices through the backing of Greenwich's state and congressional representatives. I'm not sure if you're aware, but earlier this year, we wrote a letter from the First Selectman's office approaching Congressman Himes, Senator Blumenthal, and Senator Murphy, and we had asked for their continued support to fund the CDBG program, to make sure that they are advocating for the CDBG program that we all participate in. Senator Murphy even visited Greenwich, and we toured and we visited a couple of the agencies that were funded with CDBG money, the adult daycare and Hill House. So the question on a national level is, should the town grant the CDBG loan forgiveness request? If the town grants the CDBG loan forgiveness request, what message will be conveyed with regards to the financial position of the town and its commitment to the CDBG program? As the Community Development Administrator, it is my responsibility to ensure that the town continues to be a qualified candidate for federal CDBG funding. In addition, it is my duty to remain objective and to act to the best interest of all the funding recipients. Forgiveness of the CDBG loan will result to fewer funds available to be allocated to other nonprofit agencies in town. The beneficiaries of these agencies include individuals with mental health illness or issues, underinsured or uninsured elderly, homeless persons and individuals, homebound seniors, abused or neglected children, transportation disadvantaged persons, and the list goes on. The Community Development Office works with many local and area nonprofit agencies who have expressed their constant struggles in providing valuable services despite the diminishing federal, state, and private funding resources. These agencies are already cash-strapped, and as such, forgiving the CDBG loan means sacrificing all the other programs and services offered to the rest of the low-income population in town. There's no question that forgiving the loan is the right thing to do. This will help the Housing Authority and prolong the viability of Parsonage Cottage. However, from a Black Grant Program perspective, the question is, will forgiving the loan be the best decision for the benefit of the whole town? I recommend that your board assign a group to identify and consider all other possible options in addition to this loan forgiveness request. And I had mentioned this before, we could always work with modifying the current CDBG loan. Part of that modification means we can agree to extend the repayment period or to reduce the interest rate or any other creative approach that will result to a lower repayment amount due from the Housing Authority for Parsonage Cottage. So after all this due diligence, after gathering all this documentation, I finally had a chance to review the documents that I've been providing. It's my determination that forgiving the CDBG loan is not the best course of action for the town to take, especially since other alternative actions that may benefit all parties involved and may be the best option for the town have not been explored. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Goldrick, I have you next.
Mr. Chairman, the gentleman in the audience has had his hand up.
I have him next.
May I defer to him?
Oh, certainly. Mr. Boutel. Jim Boutel, it's with Transportation Association of Greenwich, TAG.
Mr. Mason, I'm actually also a housing commissioner for the town. I served 10 years or 12 years on CDAC, representing District 8, after 25 years in the town meeting. So I come at this, my paid position is the executive director of TAG, which you see is a beneficiary of CDBG money. And I go back to the days of Nancy Brown prior to Princess, and I think they've both done excellent jobs for the town. But Ms. Kiernan, you raised the interesting point about where are things going to be down the road. We don't know about CDBG. If CDBG goes away, and it will unfortunately reach a grant size at some point where it doesn't support having the administration for it. That's just a fact of life. It's a fact of budgets in D.C. I know we're out trying to support it. But having served on CDBG and chaired CDAC, I want to make the point that these original grants that were converted to loans were part of the grant that is supposed to go to rehab projects, not social services, not administration. So to get up and suggest that by converting the loan or forgiving the loan and losing that payment stream is going to cost agencies like TAG coming in for public service money is just not accurate. To follow HUD guidelines, the payment stream that's coming in, and I know Nancy Brown ruled differently on this, and a portion of it goes to pay for administration, but the small 20% of that $30,000 that they are applying to social services, that's a drop in the bucket. The problem with CDBG is when agencies come in and apply for money, we have maybe $80,000 available for public service projects, or $100,000. And we got $600,000 in requests. On the capital side, there's much less competition. In fact, if you look at CD1 and CD2 on your agenda tonight, and look at the amount of available capital in the current, for next calendar year, over half of that money is going to the Housing Authority. What is the purpose of the CDBG program? The primary purpose of the CDBG program is to build, develop, and support affordable housing. As much as I appreciate what groups like domestic abuse do, that's not the primary purpose of the program. So by forgiving this loan, you are continuing to meet the primary purpose of the program. 80% of the income stream that comes back is going to go into the pool that the Housing Authority is one of the few recipients of. So if anybody is going to suffer from losing that income stream, it's going to be the Housing Authority on future CDBG grant requests for a pool of money that is diminishing and eventually will disappear. So I urge you to move forward, dispel the notion that somehow the Boys and Girls Club and Kids in Crisis are suffering from having this payment stream disappear, because this payment stream, unless the Boys and Girls Club is coming in for a capital project, they're not the appropriate recipients of the income stream coming in. The appropriate recipients of the income stream are capital project requests coming out of groups like the Housing Authority, where we get half of next year's rehab money in the first place. So I would hope you would file that away and sort of do away with the concept that there's a loser in this whole thing. The way to view it is by forgiving the loan, you are actually making a grant to Parsonage Cottage, which is what it originally started out as. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, Alma. Please. Alma Rutgers.
Yes, I just identify myself. I'm Alma Rutgers, and I'm chair of CDAC, the Community Development Advisory Committee. We're advisory to the First Selectman, and you've heard the history of how we've reviewed this, and you've received enormous amount of documentation. Well, we did also, some 400 pages or so, much of it the same. There's very little that I saw that was anything different from what we knew as a committee when we went through the process and deliberated and made a recommendation to the First Selectman. We're a committee of 23 voting members and 30 with the alternates, and we had 3 meetings just devoted to this subject. One was a presentation from the Housing Authority, and then there was a long meeting of deliberations, a subcommittee set up, as Princess told you, and another meeting where we made the decision to make the recommendation on a 11-2 vote. As far as I know, I only heard from other people who were in favor of this who were not able to be at the meeting, including Mark Johnson, who did send an email saying if he had been there, he would have supported it with much the same reasoning he gave. So there were only 2 people who voted against it. I only heard positive things. As far as I know, the only person who had serious questions who was not voting at the meeting was Mary Lee. And so some of the questions that we just heard now were not a part of the whole thing that was these. I sort of had an inkling of them when I saw Mary Lee this morning. So obviously the Housing Authority, and no one had an opportunity to even be prepared to answer them. But what I did want to also, I wanted to pick up on something that Ed Krummick said, but since I'm going right now after Jim Boutel, I do want to say that everything he said was accurate in terms of the grant. Only it's 15% only can go to the public service projects. The bulk of it goes to rehab, and usually the bulk of that goes to the Housing Authority. So this year we had, I think it was $1.6 million in requests for the $680,000 that you've just approved to be allocated. So of that, the 15% was maybe $100,000. It was a very small amount that would have gone to all the various public service projects. So in a way, it's that 39,000, nearly 39,000 is not really hurting. It's not income to the block grant program, but in the end, I don't think it's hurting the other agencies. And in fact, this was what our committee deliberated on. What is the better public service? We tried to weigh that, and in the end, and given the diminishing grant and the possibility the program wouldn't even be there in 14 years, the block grant program, given the incredibly wonderful resource that Parsonage Cottage is in our community, the committee overwhelmingly felt that it was very important to preserve this and act to forgive the loan to preserve the financial health, or at least help maintain the financial health of Parsonage Cottage, because we certainly don't want Parsonage Cottage to go under. I was on the Housing Authority, actually, when we did the tax credit financing, and I was on the Board of Estimate at the same time. I came on at the same time as Ed, so I guess I was here also when the grant was turned into a loan. And in the 37 years of this program in Greenwich, this is the only loan that has ever been made, and the purpose of the program is we're not supposed to be a lending program to generate interest money. That's not the purpose of the block grant program. And it was the overwhelming feeling of the committee that a better public service is served by preserving Parsonage Cottage and meeting the needs of the frail and poor elderly. And I would, as Ed said, it was creative thinking to do the tax credit financing and make this possible. And Parsonage Cottage has been a success. And I think it's important for you to think creatively about how to make this loan forgiveness happen in a way that you're all satisfied and comfortable with, which is what I wanted my committee to be comfortable, that they've answered the questions, that they understood that the program was losing the income and so on. And my committee was comfortable. You need to be comfortable, but you need to make this happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. I have Mark, then I have you back on this.
Well, Sean's been waiting if you want to.
No, he deferred before. Okay, Sean, you're first. That's just, there's not 150
just such a malleable guy, right?
It's easy.
Well, I just like to say that from my perspective, I have no problem with the mission of Parsonage Cottage. I don't see anyone who's not on the same side as that institution, or objects to what it's doing, or has any problem with it at all. I take Mr. Krummick's point that it's done wonderful things and it's been renovated in a fine way. But I also have to listen to Ms. Kiernan, who has raised some very detailed points. As she mentioned, this was a very complicated structure when it was created. It took a lot of time and effort creating this. We want to be careful in the unwinding of it as well. Ms. Rutgers mentioned that although her committee had voted in favor of this, she had not considered any of the points that Ms. Kiernan had raised this evening. We've also heard two members of the Budget Committee raise additional questions tonight who had voted for this 2 weeks ago. And I heard Mr. Yankovic say that interest rates could rise by up to 1%, so 100 basis points. Did that mean that if rates rose above that, this deal that he has envisioned would not be viable? I hear Ms. Rutgers say that we don't want Parsonage Cottage to go under. As the Finance Board, I think we all want to understand what structure you're actually contemplating in total, not just the one debt forgiveness, but how it all fits together. And if there is a way that, if this is a close run thing, if we do have, I should say, if we have a time consideration based on the fear that interest rates will rise more than 1 percentage point, which would make this unviable, then we should sit down and talk about what structures need to be done and how close we are to viability here. We want this institution to be strong and viable for a long time to come. There's one other point, which is that each of us has, particular expertise in certain areas of town government, things we take a deep interest in. This is not one of them for me. 2 weeks ago or just before was the first time that I saw this debt forgiveness come up, and I've struggled to understand this as best I could. But I want, as an individual, to know that that I understand what I'm voting for each thing that I'm voting for. Maybe in all of these pages of documents, it's all 100% clear and the answers are there, and I should just read through them again. But that's my personal responsibility. And if there is time to go through this, which we usually do with these issues and consider them carefully, we've heard conflicting points of views. We've heard doubts raised on the BET itself. It has nothing to do with whether we favor or support Parsonage Cottage or not. I would like to be able to say to whoever asks that I did my due diligence and I understood very well what exactly I was voting for. And tonight, at this point in time, I can't do that.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Mark Johnson? Bill, I'll put you down.
Just, Princess brought up an interesting point that over the next 14 years, the $38,000 it added up to about $540,000 worth of revenue. One of the documents that I believe the Housing Authority provided us showed the capital plan for Parsonage Cottage over the next 8 to 10 years. And it's interesting that they're looking, they're going to need about $1 million, if I add that up right, about $1 million for capital improvements. Given all the stuff for Parsonage Cottage was done back in 1985 and 96, they're going to be back to us, or back to the CDBG, looking for money, looking for capital improvements. So it is very important, I think, for us to forgive the loan, to help them clean up their balance sheet and get a positive cash flow so they can help pay for their own capital improvements, rather than coming back to us and asking for a lot more, the CDBG.
Mr. Finger?
Thanks. My colleagues who have preceded me in making comments have covered most of the salient points on this issue. One thing I would like to point out, there's been comment made about the CDBG grant back in the 1990s of $675,000 roughly being converted into a loan, and originally it was a grant that was going to go towards Parsonage Cottage. That is true, but let's not lose sight of the fact that because of the structure that was created and the willingness of the CDBG group back then to alter that grant and make it into a loan. That enabled the Parsonage Cottage and the Housing Authority and Department of Social Services to create a low-income housing tax credit structure that resulted in $1,750,000 worth of equity that probably would not have otherwise been available to this project. So I just want to point that out. As Sean said, he and I believe every one of us here are supportive of the mission of Parsonage Cottage. I go a little further and say that not only are we in support of the mission of Parsonage Cottage, but I, for one, and I suspect everybody else sitting up here, is also supportive of the mission of the Housing Authority. I was on the POCD Housing Task Force, and as a member of that task force, we recognize the woeful inadequacy of affordable housing in this town. And we need to do more in this town to create more affordable housing, to preserve the affordable housing that we have. And I recognize that what the Housing Authority is doing here is to try to further its mission and to preserve quality, affordable housing, in this case, supportive housing. And they're doing the right thing. However, this is a very, very complex, complicated transaction. It was complicated when it was made in the 1990s. And it's going to be very complicated to unwind and recreate another transaction or another structure that will enable the Housing Authority and Parsonage Cottage to move forward. We would be shirking our responsibility as a finance board if we did not take all the appropriate steps to make sure that the unwinding and restructuring of a new transaction structure was done cleanly and properly so that our successors on this board 10 years, 15 years from today will not be struggling, or hopefully will not be struggling with the same issues that we're struggling with here. I do believe that what the Housing Authority wants to do and the structure that has been described to us is appropriate. There might be other options. We should explore them, and I'd like to hear more from them, and will probably, on why they didn't pursue refinancing, restructuring of existing financing. But in the meantime, there's a lot of work that needs to be done to make sure this is unwound properly. And Mary Lee ticked off a number of those items. It involves the law department, it involves risk. There are a lot of items. And to echo what has been said before, we would be doing a disservice to the town, we being the BET, if we were to vote tonight on something that might create additional problems in the near term and in the long term. So I do support the notion that the motion that we refer this matter to, whether it's going to be a working group or to existing committees, to try to get the answers to the questions that have been asked. Many of them have been asked. We need to make sure that all the members of this board get those answers, but also that we see the documentation so we don't find ourselves as a town down the road facing the same problems that we're facing now.
Thank you. I think it's time to cut in. I had a motion before, which I took a little prerogative to postpone. We're in a public hearing, and I think this is important. I was the one that kept this item on the agenda for this meeting because I thought it was important that we have these conversations and get a clear understanding. Before I accept that motion, I would ask my fellow members, we're going to go into that motion with a goal, a time frame, and a who's doing it. And we need a very clear agreement on this. I would say the idea of postponing this, and I'm not against a special meeting if the homework could get done. We're going to need help from the law department. We're going to need help from Mr. Crumick. Thank you for volunteering, because we really, it's okay. You're
come under no good deed goes unpunished.
No good deed goes unpunished. Obviously, the Housing Authority, but we need to really do something on this. Obviously, this is one of the rare items that we don't deal with annually. This has been 14 years, and I agree wholeheartedly that this Board of 12 needs to really have this ironed out in a good package before it goes to the Board of 229. So I would entertain that motion. If that motion passes, I will start volunteering people like nothing. So I will go back to your motion to postpone this.
Do you want me to restate?
Yes, if you would.
Sure. So my motion is that the chair appoint a special working group, that working group work expeditiously to resolve the outstanding questions, and that no later than the October board meeting, this be addressed. So I ask that we postpone it under those terms and conditions.
Reschedule date will be
Yes.
Whatever the October date is.
Right.
the 29th of October.
Thank you. The
Okay.
29th of October.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Motion second. Discussion on the motion.
I think we're finished talking.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining.
Okay.
While still on that, Mary Lee, thank you for volunteering. Ms. Tarkington, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Mark Johnson, welcome back to the CDBG, and Mr. Finger. So I would encourage us, I'm not against a special meeting, but I think between the law department issues, obviously from a policy point of view, obviously we're trying to do that, but I think we need to expedite this as quickly as possible. For everybody who's here on this item, I hope everybody sort of got a flavor of the complexity of it and what position we're in, and we'll do our best to move forward on the best interest of the town. That brings us to, not yet. The next item we have is purchasing, and I will call on Mr. Pellegrino.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move purchasing one. This is a request for an additional appropriation of $1,584,000 for a new centralized telecom system.
Move, seconded by Mr. Finger. Committee report. Purchase, budget.
Mr. Chairman, this is a topic not unlike the other one that the Budget Committee took up and had a very extensive discussion with, at that time, Mr. Crary, Joan from Purchasing, Elaine, and also the consultant who was hired by the town to help us in this decision path. The topics were wide-ranging. The consultant, I think it was the opinion of the Budget Committee that the consultant did a very, very good job, and we were very pleased that we had hired the gentleman that offered his services. In discussing the proposals, I think two items came out that were of importance to the Budget Committee, and that being that we were not willing to just go out for an RFP for a centralized telecom system. We absolutely are insisting that we have a proposal for the cloud. That's one item that came out. Part of that was a discussion about what the cost was going to be of the cloud, and I understood our consultant to be very clear that he used a static number, i.e. the same number that we get a quote on today for the next 7 years. And I think through the discussion with him, it was very clear that that is expected to be a much lower number as time goes by. I think the vote here was 4-0 as amended, and that's where it stood as of our meeting. I'll reserve my own personal comments later as we get into this.
Okay, no other committee took discussion. Okay. During the Budget Committee, thanks, Mr. Johnson, for your help on this. During the Budget Committee, this item hit me, and I had some questions, but let me ask the board for a little thought process here. 3 years ago, Board of Education bought a new IP phone system. Brand new. It's in place. It's been in place for a little bit more than 3 years. That system is not big enough to accommodate the town of Greenwich. It's not expandable enough to be able to add our 2,000 some odd phones. The Board of Education has a future project coming up for the high school, which is sort of in a little bit in the out years, to convert Greenwich High School over to Cat 5. Obviously, the science wing, I believe, has it, and I believe Meeson will have it, but the rest of the building. Mr. Brady, anytime you would like to jump in, go right ahead.
You're doing fine.
The town currently has in testing mode our new 311 system that came from a directive from the first selectman's office. And it's initially going to be hooked up to, I believe, all the town departments. I'm hearing some reports that from a couple of the departments, it not only works, but it works really well. The issue I have is this is an interim appropriation. Interim appropriations get more scrutiny. That's just the way we used to do budgets in the town. We looked at capital on a more of an interim basis. When this item came up, I said, okay, so now we're buying new phones for the town. They'll be 3 years old. The Board of Ed will need some. And I said, enough. We need to really look at our own guidelines, our own language, finding efficiencies through technology, consolidating services, standardization. So I'm trying to ask the board for that. I spoke with the chair of the Board of Ed unofficially and said, what are we doing? Where are our plans? And spoke with Ben Brannion offline real quick to understand where their phone system was, what their projects were. I spoke with Mr. Brady. I said, why can't our new phone system that we're buying for the town be plug and play for the Board of Ed? Not necessarily day one, but could be the year after. It doesn't matter. That's not really my point. But we would have one phone system. Whether it goes cloud or not, the Budget Committee I know had questions out. You're waiting for some response on that. That also led me to the other question about who takes care of the phone systems in the town in the various departments. I don't think this is as complicated as our HR merger, but certainly we have Board of Ed and we have town. I would be willing to support a phone system, and I think Mr. Brady has done yeoman's work, and I believe we have a handout here, which I'd like to pass out, on a revision that I would support it at a later date for the inclusiveness of a system that could accommodate, can you just pass those down, all of the, this has been sent to you electronically also, but that could accommodate everything. So with that, it puts me in a position where, do I not want to support this item, because obviously I do support this item, or do I want to wait until we can, I think you're getting close, right, Mr. Brady, to be able to roll at least what we would need hardware-wise, and then do the count on the Board of Ed. And the consultant is, from Lead and Associates, is pretty clear. It's not that much of a big change. It's doubled over the period. But I think if we were to package this together, I would feel we actually did what we say we're going to do on a routine basis. One single phone system for the town. I don't really, if it's an IT management, doesn't matter to me. I don't know. That's not my HR, and the Board of Ed and the town can work on that. But I guess my point is I'm looking for, finding these efficiencies, looking to single source. The IP address, a new employee comes to town, they get their phone, they get their IP address, it can go anywhere they go. Look at Mr. Brady down there, he's smiling at me because obviously we've made a lot of technical advances at this board since while your term is on this. So I put that out for discussion, and I would hope that we could support, doing the big project rather than this interim step and work our way towards a unified standard system. So that's my, Mr. Raymer. Don't give him two mics, he'll speak twice.
I'll never stop talking if you do that. I think actually that the motion that was carried 4-0 before the Budget Committee was slightly different. I think the motion that was before the Budget Committee was that we were voting to approve the item with the conditions, two of them. One of them was that bids should be solicited both for the centralized system and for the cloud. And then there was the second condition that the approval was subject to the acceptance and approval of the BET of the bids when they came in, and we would make our election at that time. By the way, I see no reason why this body, if it wants to, can't add a third item to that and say that the project should be expanded to include the telephone system for the town. For the Board of Ed, I'm sorry, for the Board of Ed. Thank you, Bill. I asked Bob, who's our resident expert, the question about whether or not the dollar figure seemed to be appropriate to be able to absorb the bidding process that would include the Board of Ed, because I wanted to avoid a situation where the bids as they came in to include the Board of Ed would be at a higher number, requiring that we go back with a new bonding resolution or a new approach to the RTM. Bob seemed to be, he wasn't given much opportunity to prepare for an answer for that, but Bob seemed to be generally of the opinion that probably the $1,584,000 would be sufficient to cover the bids. It might be in part that he was expecting that likely we're drifting towards a cloud side, and if that's the case, the original capital cost actually might be a considerably smaller number. I'll let Bob speak for himself. But anyway, I wanted to propose just that amplification to be sure that both of the conditions that we discussed at the Budget Committee were included in the item that's before us.
Yeah, I want to thank you because this is what happens when you go away on vacation. You forget the second point. Thank you.
So, Mr. Brady.
I think there was also a third point, which was that $150,000 would be released with this tonight, or when we voted on it, so that they could get underway. The 150 being probably a number that's larger than necessary. It's what was used for the 800 megahertz system to get that going, and it was more than adequate. If I may, Mr. Chairman.
Please.
Remember how this got to us. 9 months ago, we received a memo which said Avaya has told us it's going to kill everything. It's going to shoot us. The system's going to die, and we've got to pay them $350,000 or. Thank you. I thought I turned that off.
Or that's going to happen.
That's it. That fox is back again. Sorry, Wayne. That we were basically we were told that the world was going to end in 2 weeks if we didn't pay them $350,000 immediately. We said that doesn't make sense. We voted to not give them the money. Instead said go back and figure out what's going on, take a look at the systems. They hired Steve Leiden back there, and he spent a lot of time over the last several months figuring out what we do in town, what our needs are, what our uses are, and came up with several alternatives, including just keeping our current 1990 system and making it like new. And it turned out that wasn't a $350,000 number. It was really closer to $1.3 million or something like that. I think they did a good job. They came to us with the proposal we asked for in last January or February. Wow. And we took that a couple of weeks ago, on the 10th, and said, let's look at both the cloud and the one you're recommending, the central system. You don't include the school system. No, school system's got a new system. It's working well. Let that one go for now. They're already on VoIP in a lot of locations. They've got to rewire the high school for some of it, et cetera. In the interim, question arises, well, can we make space for it? Can we set it up so that when it becomes necessary, desirable, or when we just want to do it, we can plug the high school into this, or plug the whole Board of Ed into this? And we went back to Mr. Leiden and his company, asked them, and that's the email you have here, which basically says, yes, you can. We can go out and seek proposals which include not only meeting the town side requirement, both in a cloud and a centralized configuration, but at the same time get the costs for for providing the ability to add the town at a later date. What would it take to take a somewhat larger system, to take some specialized equipment, which has to be put in today in order to be able to pick up the schools 3 years from now. And if I understand your letter, John, or Steve, that's exactly what you said we can do. And I would hope we would continue moving on that tonight. We got here, we have we did get an extension from the supplier that said the world was going to end. But that is an extension of the support. It does not include warranties or guarantees of equipment. Stuff still may be hard to find. They will continue to support us to the extent they can. And we are beyond end of life for some of the equipment. And this is probably not a good time to stop and wait to figure out whether we really want to bring the Board of Ed in now or bring them in on a schedule a year or 2 or 3, whenever it's appropriate, later. I took the time, I spoke to both Ben Brannion and Ron Matten this week. They are very enthusiastic about turning it all over to the town. They don't want it. So they'd be very happy.
We're making
they'd be
progress.
you've got some a lot of support over there for unloading services that aren't core critical to them, and they would love to, or mission critical. They'd be happy to see this go when it's appropriate. They do have a lot of work, or there will be a lot of rewiring at the high school. That's the one biggie.
Ben did tell me.
But that's, that'll happen one way or another, with the possible exception that as technology continues to develop, there may be a less expensive way of accommodating it. The same has happened with this building. That a year ago, I don't believe you could do what's being contemplated, which is to use the Cat 3 wiring that we've got on the communications side for a VoIP system. But with some additional equipment, it can be done today. So we do benefit from the passage of time sometimes.
So that brings me to my question. So how do we, as a Board of Finance, how do we roll this in so it's very clear what our long-range goal, what we're willing to support, what it includes, and what we need back as confidence for that?
We add to the condition that called for a cloud and centralized hardware system and a cloud-based system. We add also that, and I think Jeff said this, that both proposals, or all of the proposals responding to either side, also respond to the question of, and we want whatever you're proposing to be able to accommodate in a 2 to 3 year period transfer of the Board of Ed system, or load, basically, over onto the system we're building. So we have one common system throughout the town.
So would that be just the system, or would it be actually phones right on through?
Ultimately, it would be phones right on
Right, that's
through.
what I was expecting.
But it's still a phased
Of course.
implementation. You may not do the second piece until 2016.
Oh, that's,
But the request for proposal, which is what we're talking about releasing, would not only describe the town side system, but it would also describe the Board of Ed side, and that whatever proposal they're making be able to accommodate the addition of the Board of Ed system at a later date.
Question, Mr. Chair.
are you done, Mr. Brady?
Yeah.
Mr. Raymer?
I just want to ask Mr. Brady, would it not be better that we ask that the bids contain the option to include so we get a bid with the BOE and a bid without the BOE? Wouldn't that be a better choice, or is that not a good choice?
I'll defer to Steve on that. At some point, it begins to get very complicated.
Yes, hi everyone.
Respond.
Steve Layden, the consultant who wrote the email and prepared the report, et cetera. Thanks for your time. The industry is kind of built around the fact that when you buy and purchase in a capital format, you get significant discounts. And the industry still lags a little bit, that it's really a data technology, but it grew out of voice, and so the data rules are starting to apply. But the voice rules also apply, and what that means is that typically when you purchase a system after you have made that initial capital, the 30% discount goes to a 0% discount. So we can potentially write provisions into the RFP to say if you want to do business with the town of Greenwich, we can potentially, require that kind of discount, but it's not a hard, fast de facto rule in the industry. Yet when you buy, let's say, data switches or routers or things along those lines for wide area networks like we have here at the town of Greenwich, those are smaller, open standard types of devices. You're not making 1.5 million in purchase at once. You're buying a router or a switch on an individual, and the discounts are not as great, but you typically will get discounts on each one. So again, you're starting to see the clash of the titans, if you will, in the industries between voice and data. And so we're starting to ask for things with clients where we want to see, we're doing a state job, for example, with Stony Brook University and Medical Center right here on Long Island, and we are asking for provisions for discounting. Now, whether the vendors are going to honor that, that's a different story, but the general rule is it's $1 on the dollar after you have made the initial purchase. So I think really, to both of your points, I think it could go either way, either as an option or a requirement. The challenge is going to be as, or at least I'm thinking even as a budgetary, just so that you know what that price will be. We can put into the RFP at least a request of the vendor that we would like to see that price guaranteed for X period of time. Normally the vendors will only guarantee their actual bid for 120 days. And it's less about because of the guarantee, it's more because the industry is kind of it's a typical flux of where license models go down and hardware prices go down. And we're actually in a good period where the pricing has gone down. I was sharing with Bob at an earlier date that, in fact, I might have mentioned to you last time, Joe, that the price of a voice over IP only system 2 years ago is actually, compared with the voice over IP plus unified communications, that's all of your cell phone and your video and IM chat functions and presence, who's available, who's not on the BET and on the board, et cetera. Those kinds of feature functions plus the phone system is now less today than just the basic phone system 24 months ago. So that's the good spot. But it will level out at some particular point. And to Joe's earlier point about the cloud, we are in an early adopter stage in that particular market. Most of the traction you're seeing in the 200 endpoint or phone size, we're obviously more closer to the 2,000 endpoint size. And then at the BOE, now we're closer to 3,300 endpoints. So we're a big fish, if you will, in that particular area. We are doing a large cloud rollout. I might have mentioned this last time for Fujifilm, 7,000 endpoints. We're deploying it right now nationally, but we're rare. In fact, my CIO was the featured speaker at a national conference because it was so rare. So, early adopter, it's a good time to jump in. Though it's not about technology in the cloud. It's about a managed service and it's about a rental model.
Steve,
yes, Joe.
You touched on something. I just want to go off on a tangent.
Sure.
That this used to be a voice world. It's really moved to a data world. It's
Correct.
really moved to a technology that's so different from the old. Pick up the telephone with the wire on it.
Absolutely.
And you work with a wide range of clients.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I'm curious about is when you work through these issues with your clients and you deliver the new system, the state of the art
Mm-hmm.
of where people are, where is the responsibility for that residing inside of your clients now going forward? Is this residing in the old telephone department,
No,
or is
well,
it now residing in the data management, the IT
Yeah, so
department? So where's it residing?
No problem, Joe. Yeah, so telephony used to fall under facilities departments, sometimes even within those departments that took care of cabling, even cafeterias, buildings, et cetera.
Right.
Used to be a building infrastructure kind of technology. As it merged with IT and became an IP kind of function, if you will, really it be nine times out of 10 it's under the CIO's realm.
Right.
In today's market, it has become, it's really, again, it's data technology and therefore became the responsibility of the CIO. The challenge that most CIOs...
Chief
Information Officer.
Thank you.
I'm
I always
sorry.
think of Chief Investment Officer.
Okay. Kudos, Joe. But, no, Chief Information Officer, my apologies.
Right.
Okay. The challenge I can tell you where the challenge is, though. It's not
even though it's a data transport technology, it's really an application running on the data network, and it's much different than just a data transport of, any kind of email or web browsing that you and I might do on the internet. It's quite different. And therefore, most CIOs really actually, I'll quote a CIO from a major hospital right here in the tri-state area. He said, "Don't you know that every CIO hates telecommunications?" And the reason is because it's got a different need, it's got a different urgency, it's got a different SLA. I mean, you and I can have what I would call just some lag on the internet. Gee, it's a little bit slow. By the time you and I say it's a little bit slow on the internet, at least 20 people would have called in a failure on the phone system. So it's a little bit more sensitized, but there's rules that we play with, there's best practices that we use in the business that
Right.
can manage that.
Okay, so my observation I want to share is with all my colleagues. I think, first of all, Mike, what you did in terms of your thought process is, I compliment you because you really have asked the question of, if we're going to be $1.5 million into something, have we really thought through completely all the aspects of the town, which includes the Board of Ed, because we fund the Board of Ed. Have we thought through doing something once the right way, the most efficient way, and the best way? So I compliment Mike, because that's really what the issue is that he's raised. The issue that I also raise is, what you've just gone to here, the chief, I keep
Information
Thank
officer.
you, information officer. We're in a transition where we have an IT department that next year will have new leadership. And I'm very concerned that as a board, we'd be very clear with our expectations and direction in terms of how we're spending the taxpayers' money. And that is that this is something then that should be residing in the IT department going forward. And I think that they should be part of, and I don't know how you do this, but we have one, that they should be part of this process right now with the RFP, so that there's no, when there's a transition later, that they're like not out there saying, well, we weren't part of this.
And I can tell you, as an internal ad hoc committee that
Yeah.
we've been reviewing this internally, we've included the CIO from the town in all along.
Okay, so those are my concerns, because I think it's really important to try to do this right and as efficiently as possible. And if we do, we should have a state-of-the-art system that helps people be more productive, provide a better service to our taxpayers, and do it in a way that's more efficient to deliver that service internally. Okay.
Agreed.
Those are my thoughts, and I want to make sure that the RFP is written the right way, Mr. Chairman, so I don't know how you would entertain anything on that along those lines, but I would like to think that there would be maybe Mr. Brady or someone from our own board as part of that process that would sign off on it.
The original.
We did put a condition on this from the
Oh.
Budget Committee. Thank you, I was wondering where that was.
I will come back to that. Just hold on to that. Ms. Tarkington had.
Yes, I agree with Mr. Pellegrino. Mr. Chairman, I think that you were bringing up this point was an excellent addition to this particular appropriation. So, I commend you on that. I guess I have one question. I'm not sure if it's for you or Mr. Brady. I actually have an additional one for Mr. Brady. Are we missing any other part of the town? I mean, I just want to make sure that if we're going to proceed, and now that we've added the BOE, that we've really hit every spot. Is that true, Bob, or would you add some other things? I see you smiling down there. Is this all right if I ask him?
I would just, my answer to that is I included everything from golf to civic centers. I was right across the board.
We think they're all in there. There may be a telephone hidden somewhere.
Oh, okay. So.
But if there is, it will be disconnected.
It'll be disconnected, okay.
And
All right.
then I have one more question. Now that we're expanding this, our condition excluded that $150,000 so that you'd have it for front end. And now that we're expanding the RFP, will you need any additional funds, or will the $150,000 still be satisfactory?
And I would defer to our consultant. It's basically the money to engage him to work on the RFP, evaluate the responses. As I said, with the 800 megahertz system, that's the amount that we provided. and I think it came in at around a third of that.
Okay, so here's a real question. Suppose we were to do the town system, forget the adding of the Board of Ed and the cloud. When would we, if we appropriated this, when would the hammering and nailing begin?
When would the hammer and nailing begin? Okay.
So an RFP goes out,
Right,
20 days
okay.
for review.
Yes. Uh-huh. Yeah,
90
it's-
for
For
sure.
you to get the RFP in the form you want it in is going to take you
Yeah, so without the BOE,
60
'cause-
days right there.
Yeah, the prep for the actual request for proposal is typically around 4 to 6 weeks. You allow 4 weeks, maybe 6 worst case for the vendor community to respond, especially because we're going public bid, et cetera.
So
you know, in
you're
this-
at 80 days, 90 days.
Right, right. And then again, you know, we have a whole process internally that we'll have to go through for, you know, standards and grading and scorecarding, et cetera, you know.
So a decision now
Yeah,
is
that's-
at the
that's at least
120
another-
mark,
Yeah, mm-hmm.
150 mark, 120
Yeah,
mark.
yeah, it's typically one.
Or back to the BET probably in February.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's the timeframe you're talking.
Yeah, I had a brief timeline in here earlier from the actual.
Okay, so that leads me to, if I can bother John Curry for a second.
Sure.
This is a summer project next year. This is, for all intents and purposes, this is a springtime, summer project next year.
Yes, I think that's what we anticipate.
Okay.
The only questions we haven't really discussed as a group is what data do we need from the Board of Ed to include in the RFP to make sure we can respond properly? So I'm not sure. Some of that may already be available through the work they did on the Mitel system, or it may require, you know, there's 15 buildings, there's a lot of prep to do this. So that's one area that has to be thought out and discussed.
All right, I'm familiar with Mitel, we have it all over the country, but, okay, so that's next summer. So I'm trying to think this out, because obviously we have to work with the Board of Ed on.
We included a timeline. We figured from March through, I think, October, November, 6-month period, because we had to run it parallel before we switch over.
Okay, so
we
now-
figured over that period of time, we could implement the new system, make sure everything's working properly, and then flip.
Okay, so then my guess would be, we have to talk with the Board of Ed about when they plan on doing the high school wiring project. And
Sure.
theoretically, if we were to do the next springtime, start the Board of Ed, which would probably take 2 seasons, right? So we're,
To add there, certainly. It would
Right.
be probably the summer of the following year,
Okay.
assuming everything clicks.
so,
Summer is a great time to do, you know.
yeah,
higher
the Board of Ed's fantastic at doing their summer projects. Their facilities are, a lot of them are closed. So with that said, why would we not roll this into, I mean, we do capital projects all the time that take 3 years. Why are we not rolling this into, the Board of Ed system will be 6 years old, right?
I don't want to guarantee anything, because we haven't had a chance to really think this thing through.
Would you like
We
us
talked
to
about.
postpone this so
No,
that
we
you
do
can-
not, because this is really important that we move
What
on
is it?
this.
We could take a timeout.
It was important to us that this be scalable, exactly how it would fit in with the Board of Ed. It was important that the Board of Ed be supportive of this. It's not something we ram down their throats. And
No, I'm
I know
being
you've
fair. I
talked
mean-
with Ben and some other members from the BOE, and I'm assuming that they are supportive of it and it'll fit right in.
Right, but
So
my
from
point
those
is-
perspectives, we all agree.
We don't knock on any of the Board of Ed's doors for, this is
Sure.
18 months.
Well, I suspect this will work out fine, but we just haven't spent the time to talk through all the details of it.
Okay, so, all right, Mr. Brady, get me from where we are to where we want to be.
And by the way, we're very appreciative that Bob has been part of our team, because he has added not just the perspective of the BET, but his technical knowledge has helped us.
There's
It's
people
a
on
better
this-
group that's
There's
part of
people
it.
on this board who have thought about kidnapping and abduction from Mr. Brady, so we're well aware of that. So, again, it brings me to my original question. We have a goal. How do we get there? How do we do this? What do we need to do to establish our long-range goal and execute it?
I believe we've got a pretty good handle on the long-range goal. We know what the end point is, a common system, whether it's iron in the basement or whether it's entirely cloud, is to be determined. Because of the end-of-life issues with the existing equipment, however, this is one of those cases where I believe time is working against us. At least it's not our friend, and that we should be moving forward with the townside system in mind to get that in place, one way or the other, iron in the basement or cloud. And do that with the expressed requirement that whatever we're looking at be expansible to handle the Board of Ed system, Board of Ed load in the 2015, 16, 17 timeframe, so that we're not buying, if we do wind up buying equipment, that we're not buying equipment which, by virtue of its size, shape, connectivity, whatever, cannot accommodate the Board of Ed. We want to make sure we can tie everything together. That we can do now. We can have the equipment that fits and move forward, I think, now and solve the town problem, which was the thing that brought this forward in the first place. We're out of support.
So Bob, if I could just footnote what you were just sharing, and that is that based on the email that I sent earlier today, the difference between an 1,800 station system, phone system for the town, and up to 3,200, including the BOE, it's a fairly sizable jump, and therefore the kinds of servers and the kind of system that would be offered by a specific manufacturer could be different. So I would include the planning or an option or some flavor of we're planning on this one unified system, and again, if we can introduce options for the vendor to provide us some kind of preferred pricing for 36 to 48 months out, however we as the town want to ask for it, and plan accordingly, And then from a timing point of view, Michael, back to you. We did add some provisioning in short term to do some closet readiness and some network readiness to make sure that the WAN is ready for voice over IP and the closets are. So during that period, we can actually do some homework as well with the BOE to do some discovery along with them to stay with the timelines.
Okay, so, all right, we need to move this on. Now I'm ready, Maria, for the conditions.
If the RFP has to come back to be approved by the BET, you're forcing them to have the delay to another meeting. It seems to me, if I could suggest to the board, maybe we designate somebody, Bob or somebody, to do the review for us without it coming back and waiting for us at the next meeting, if I could make that suggestion.
That condition's on behalf of a committee, and although we may choose to modify it, or we may choose to have just another motion and delegate it to a couple members.
I don't think that, as I remember it, the review wasn't of the RFP. The review is of the bids when they.
The proposals.
Yeah. So we're looking at February, March of next
She read
year
it.
is when I expect.
It's review of the RFP.
It had two pieces to it. What she read had two pieces, Leslie. The one piece was the review and acceptance of the bids. But if Maria took it down correctly, and I suspect that she did, the words she took down were also review and approval of the BET of the RFP before it goes out, the RFP to include, et cetera, cloud, centralized system, et cetera. Yeah.
Let me ask a question, because mechanically, I just want to understand, Jeff, what you're saying, because even if we approve this, even with that condition, it can still be on the call for the RTM. The RTM can vote on it. We still have the condition, and they're not going to have the RFP for 30 days. So I don't see a problem with this coming back after Bob scrubs it down, but I think we should look carefully at this RFP. This is a topic, I'm not talking to you. You know that we have been dealing with this for 4 years, and it's taking somehow a very painful time to try to get this the way we're trying to suggest to the authorities of how it should be done.
I don't have a problem with the RFP coming back to us for our approval, as long as that doesn't produce delay.
It shouldn't.
If that's going to produce a month or something of delay,
then I would rather see us designate one or two people to do it.
I
on
hear
our
you,
behalf.
but I think that this should not cause delay timing-wise. We know that Bob's part of the working group and that he's going to scrub it down, and I have a lot of confidence in Bob. So if he knows that it
500
expresses
pages.
what we as a board collectively feel about this project, then it should have no problem flying through next month. In the meantime, they're going to go ahead and go to the RTM and get the approval.
We'll go to the RTM next month to get
Right.
the approval for the funding, and then we will authorize Steve and his firm to commence working on the
On the
RFP.
RFP. So we're not
Now,
even
as
gonna-
part of that,
Have it for-
they have a lot of research they have to do.
Right.
Adding the Board of Ed means we have to go to 15 schools and look at their facilities, make sure we understand exactly their system,
John,
or
they-
look at the data that's already been prepared.
Okay. Right.
There's also work that he has to do in our facilities. As he mentioned, the closets, some of the closets where we have our equipment has to be looked at, make sure we have the space and everything.
I understand.
There's a lot of running around to make sure what we put in the RFP will actually
Right.
work. So maybe you'll have the RFP December, January, probably, I
That's
think you'll be
fine.
looking at January coming back to the RTM.
We have an
And
October.
then we have to try and get prices. And by the way, when we get prices, it's not going to be a bid like, I want a 2015 car with specific parts. They're going to come in with all sorts of variables. We're going to have to negotiate and discuss both with the committee and with the vendors, and eventually we're going to come to a conclusion, this vendor, this price, this mix of different services is the best mix for the town of Greenwich. So that's why we're saying March is when we think we'll be back asking for a sign-off on the million, whatever the remaining amount is. And that's the process.
Right. But as
And we would like to have Bob. We were wondering what we're going
So-
to do with Bob
Right.
not being on the BFT
So
after.
if in March, this appropriation goes from 1.5 and it ends up being at 3.5.
Well, see, then you'll be in your CIP process, and if you wanted to add on the Board of Ed,
Right.
you could do that in the following.
Because I'm
July
not,
1st
I'm
fiscal
pretty
year.
sure we should be able to get a phone inventory from the Board of Ed fairly quickly.
It's more
They-
than, it's.
Yeah, there's some Q&A, there's some discovery
I
with some
understand.
of the higher ups, just to get their vision and direction and
Right.
what kinds of feature functionality we need.
Right.
Bob came up with a very creative option. Do you want to share that, Bob, about the BET and the rest of the board with soft phones and unified communications, or, anyway?
Oh, being able to reach each one of these people
Yep.
through their town number 24/7.
Exactly.
You'll
That's
really
right.
like
And
that.
available 24/7.
Right.
When we get to another item on our agenda, you should listen to that one. Okay, so the item before us, I'm still not getting my wish list. And I want to be very clear. I want to make sure when the RTM gets this, that they know we're going for a unified standard system and all of that. So how do I get that? Is that just, I'm not sure.
To the extent that you want to put the BET in the policy-making business
So exactly what,
of operating policy, strategic operating policy, certainly in the preamble to this, going, and I guess, John, you'll be writing it up, but in the preamble, a statement on which the Board of Ed would agree that it is the intention of the town and the Board of Ed to have a single system at some point within the next 5 years, to put a timeline on it.
Mr. Joe, you have any- Was that your answer? Is that-
I'm suggesting some words that might go on it.
So as I've been sitting here.
Whether it's cloud or hardware in the basement,
thinking-
whatever makes most sense economically.
Okay, look.
And that's total picture economically, by the way, not
So
just
let
hardware.
me share with you why I think I've been struggling with this tonight. It's because the proposal that's in our package that I've been reading from doesn't reflect what we voted on at the Budget Committee. And I would have thought that someone would have revised this to include and spelled out the conditions that the Budget Committee had placed on it, number one. So as I go through that, I'm thinking there's actually 4 conditions we're talking about. We're first saying that it's upon, this is conditioned upon the review and approval of the RFP. That's one issue, number one. Number two, $1,434,000 $1,443,000 is subject to release upon review and acceptance of the proposed best bid, or however we word that, the bid. That's the second thing. Third is we were clear that the RFP must include a proposal for a cloud-based system. And fourth, what goes to Mr. Mason's point, is that the RFP must include a request for all town departments and entities, including the Board of Ed. However expansive you want to make that last condition is fine with me. But I think these are the four things we're talking about. So if we want to move forward with this tonight, those are the four conditions. Cloud-based,
I would,
RFP,
if you're asking for
subject to
a
the
motion,
bid.
I would move that be
Okay.
the amendment to the,
Okay, but
to
Hang on one second, Mr.
TUR1.
Okay, so
Conditions.
I'm hoping we're all clear. Ms. Tarkington, do you have?
before we go to vote, I don't know what you're going to say now, but before, I have a comment.
Okay, so. Roland?
I don't know how things go out bid, including the Board of Education, we're not changing that dollar. Because if they come back and say, town and Board of Ed is $2.5 million, you don't have an appropriation.
So you'd have to appropriate the additional money at the time that you're seeking to approve the bid here. It's coming back for approval of the bid anyway. It means it has to go back to the.
Why did they need a
RTM.
dollar amount at all?
But if you're doing
out
it
for
as a
RFP.
phased approach, we
Right.
get locked-in prices, or
If you sign a contract for $3 million.
We're not signing a contract.
No.
We're not going to sign a contract until it comes back.
All right, there's another way to approach this. Let me ask you this. Can we go ahead tonight and just authorize $150,000 so that we can go ahead and start the process of hiring Steve to do the RFP? And between now and next month, please figure out for us what the real dollar amount is that we will need by including all the town entities. And then you come forward with that dollar amount, and then we can pass that along to the RTM. This way, there's only one time to the RTM for the dollar amount, but we don't hold up the project, as Bob has said, for $150,000 right now. So I'm comfortable with that, understanding that the $150,000 still has those conditions attached
You
to
do
it.
that, it goes to the RTM for the December meeting. Is that what you're
Yeah, I
anticipating?
think so.
No,
Is that-
make-
is that
No,
right?
I'm
we
suggesting
have to
that
go
if we
for
do
the
this right now
150.
for the 150, they're going to be able to go there.
In
I
October.
agree with that, but
Right.
the money beyond the 150.
Yes, it would
end
go
up
to the
no sooner
December.
than
All right,
December.
one at a
That's
time.
correct.
Hang on, Peter.
That works.
so we,
Do we need to worry that at the RTM, they're going to say, well, you're asking us to appropriate and approve
80.
$150,000, but what, we don't know the next step.
we're definitely going to have that. There's no
Yeah,
question
we've heard
about
that
it.
before.
But,
This is
you know,
a-
you can look at it as, just like many of our capital projects where
Not
they're
by-
spread out over years, where we would spend a certain amount each year based on whatever we're trying to accomplish. In this case, we're doing the RFP, we're doing the town, and we're in a position, we have the money
you're hiring-
available to
you're
do the
hiring
Board of
someone.
Ed at a point that's appropriate in the future.
Let's,
So
everybody
the
in
money
the
would
room.
be already appropriated, but it would not be
Excuse me
spent.
one second, John. Peter and Roland,
Steve Leidman, yeah.
gentlemen. Thank you.
Could borrow,
The
that's-
item before us is enough money to hire someone to do the work, package, to come back. We'll call it A&E as if we were building a building. That's what we're authorizing spending. Okay? That would take a motion for us to amend the item before us. So we have a motion to add a condition, we would have a motion to amend. With that said, I want to call Ms. Tarkington because she had a question before this.
Well, my question related to also something that we discussed related to this in the Budget Committee, and that was that it would go forth with a bonding resolution. This is a major capital project that you would normally do in the CIP program, but, because of the timing and the urgency of this, we're doing it now as an interim. But because of the size, which appears to be at least $1.6 million, and perhaps more now that we're talking about the BOE, adding the bonding resolution would mean that we could finance it over a 7-year period, which I think would be constructive given some of the constraints that we have going ahead using up, that much cash.
Okay, thank you. So, Peter, let's be very clear. So, A&E, we would fund this portion with cash if later on we decide that the
When you're
system...
voting on a bonding resolution, B-105-92500. This is the first piece. And then you're just going to supplement it with the $1,434,152. And the third piece is to be part of the CIP process in the future.
Does this project have a capital project number yet? Does this project have a capital project number yet?
It's the next one that,
Okay.
Do we have to approve a bonding resolution now, or just as part of this, we are approving, implicit in that, we are approving a bonding resolution to be drafted?
If you don't approve a bonding resolution now, you can't include the $150,000.
You need a funding source. You have two options. You can bond it, or you can get it from the capital non-recurring.
Okay.
Right, but is it correct, Peter, that for this front-end cash, the $150,000, this is sort of the final decision? We won't be able to include it in the bonding resolution for the remainder of the project if we don't approve this for bonding today. Is that correct? Or could we take that and refinance it with the remainder of the project?
Yeah, it's cleaner if you just, we'll give you, you can vote on it's going to come from the capital non-recurring, $150,000. It's going to be the Z fund, which is not, B is the bonding fund. And then all the subsequent appropriations may be to bonding.
Correct.
So you're going to have to vote on a number to be supplied by finance, and then RTM will get the number, because all the projects are sequentially handed out. Who's the next one in line?
Now, you're going to have to help me. But you're proposing that the $150,000 come from capital, non-recurring cash, and not be bonded, and only the capital part of the project later on be bonded?
Yes.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, so Roland, that's sort of easy, that one. Okay, so that brings us back to, imagine the minutes for this meeting, wow. So that brings us back to a very simple, need a motion to reduce to $150,000 for this item? That's
So
a-
moved.
Moved. Discussion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? Okay, step one's done. Step two is a motion, Mr. Pellegrino and Mr. Brady's motion to add condition number 4.
The conditions that should be added are, first, that subject to approval, to review and approval of the RFP, subject to review and approval of the RFP.
Well, the conditions out of the Budget Committee, I'm going to consider those moved.
Correct.
Right, so it's one more.
It's an RFP. It's not
No,
a competitive bid.
the RFP to include the cloud-based proposal, the RFPs to, and this is what you want, the RFPs to address all Town of Greenwich departments, including the Board of Ed.
Okay.
And you realize when we say that, we really mean figure out where all the phones are right now and then go at it. I don't think we do that until we do the dollar amount.
Right. Okay.
Right?
So,
Right? Yeah.
okay, so are we all clear on that? Okay, so, Maria, would you just make sure that when you get the minutes on this section, just email it so I can make sure everybody has this one real quick in case there's a change before we get down the road? Okay, so with that added condition, so am I correct, Maria? We have the Budget Committee's original recommendations, and we have that one more to add. Separate action item. Correct. Gotcha, okay. Okay, so, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? Wow. 12-0-0, thank you. Mr. Pellegrino, Mr. Brady. Okay. Thank you. Okay, I am going to ask for, we're going to need an executive session for our next item.
Wait,
I'm going to ask for a quick,
May I make a suggestion? We have the assessor and the assistant assessor that are sitting here,
So moved.
May I suggest
So
that we
moved.
let them, and also we have a public hearing, maybe close the public
Correct.
hearing?
Right.
And
That's
then
what I
we
was-
could do whatever we
Okay.
want to do.
So, Mr. Finger has a motion to take an item out of order.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. All opposed? Abstaining? There you go. You're up. Assessor's
Okay.
report is next.
I'll be quick. Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the BET. I'd like to present the assessor's report for September 2013. Also, I'd like to mention this evening that the Board of Assessment Appeals did meet on September 12th. They were hearing appeals on motor vehicles only, and there were 49 appeals, and the reduction in taxes was roughly $6,794. This week, the assessor's office will be sending personal property declarations out to all businesses here in Greenwich. They are due back to the assessor's office on November 1st. We have an additional, I think, roughly 335 businesses that we've discovered so far this year. Okay. And finally, our new software from Quality Data, we are in the process of converting all our data. It is underway. Last week, our staff was trained for a week on the new software, and we expect to be up and running the week of October 7th, running on this new software.
Wow, very good. Very good.
Any questions?
I was, for the first time, I'll just add to a report, I was fortunate to work with one of our town property owners on an issue with our assessor, and it was quite interesting.
Yes.
A little education for me, but I'm still getting packages in mail. But thank you for your help with that, by the way.
No problem.
All those in favor of the assessor's report?
Aye.
I'm sorry.
I move that we accept the assessor's report.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Finger. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining. Mr. Finger also just asked me for another motion to move item 7 up to our next item, which is close the public hearing.
Second.
Seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, I will now entertain a motion to close the public hearing for the Community Development
So
Block
moved.
Grant.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining. With that, Mr. Fox, we have the next item on the agenda is SE1, and I believe you might be asking us for an executive session. Would it be a...